Every parent knows the pain of watching a child go hungry. Every leader knows the weight of making choices that haunt their sleep. King Thorne has ruled the kingdom of Valdris with an iron fist for 23 years. The battle-scarred Alpha King built his throne on strength and fear. One cold morning in the market square, he sees a starving child trembling in the dirt. The boy's eyes remind him of something he lost long ago. Against all protocol, the king kneels and offers bread from his own table. The crowd watches in shock as their feared ruler shows mercy. But what happens next changes everything. The child returns with a woman whose presence awakens memories Thorne buried deep. She has eyes like winter sky and carries herself with quiet dignity despite her worn clothes. What could make the most feared Alpha King risk his throne for two strangers? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Valdris as King Thorne made his way back to the castle, the weight of his iron crown seeming heavier than usual. For 23 years, this crown had been both his burden and his power, a reminder of the sacrifices made and the blood spilled to forge a kingdom from the ashes of endless wars. The fortress of Stoneheart Castle loomed before him, its black walls scarred by decades of siege and battle. Every stone told a story of survival. Every tower bore witness to the ruthless decisions that had shaped his reign. Thorne paused at the great doors, his weathered hands tracing the carved wolf's head that served as his family crest. The symbol had once meant everything to him. Strength, loyalty, the pack protecting its own. Now it felt like an echo of something he'd lost along the way. Inside the great hall, his council waited with the day's concerns. Lord Commander Garrett, his oldest friend and most trusted advisor, stood beside the war table, where maps of the borderlands were spread like prophecies of future conflicts. Sir Marcus, the treasurer, shuffled through ledgers with the perpetual frown of a man who counted coins, while others counted lives. Lady Celeste, the court's chief diplomat, maintained her usual composed expression that revealed nothing and everything. "At once, Your Majesty," Garrett began, his gruff voice carrying the weight of shared battles and mutual respect. "The northern borders report increased activity from the Ravenclaw clan. They're testing our defenses again." Thorne nodded, settling into his throne, a massive chair carved from the same black stone as his castle walls. The seat had been his father's, and his grandfather's before that. Each ruler had worn away a little more of the armrests with their grip during countless hours of difficult decisions. Thorne's own fingers had carved their own grooves over the decades. "How many scouts?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority that had never been questioned. 12 riders, moving in formation. They withdrew when our patrols approached, but they were mapping our positions. Marcus consulted his notes with nervous precision. "The Treasury can support increased border patrols for 3 months, possibly 4, if we reduce spending elsewhere." "What elsewhere?" Thorne's eyes narrowed. His kingdom's prosperity had always been built on careful balance. Enough strength to defend, enough resources to endure. The winter food stores for the lower districts, the orphanages, the widow's aid. Marcus spoke each item like a man listing his own failures. A familiar tension settled between Thorne's shoulders. These were the decisions that followed him into sleep, the choices that carved lines deeper into his face with each passing year. He had built Valdris into a fortress kingdom, impregnable and feared, but every wall came with a price paid by those who lived within it. "Double the border patrols," he decided. "Take the funds from my personal treasury first. The people have suffered enough winters already." Garrett and Marcus exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that came from decades of serving. The same crown. They had seen their king make such choices before, though he rarely spoke of the reasons behind them. Lady Celeste stepped forward, her silk robes whispering against the stone floor. "Your Majesty, There's another matter. The woman and child from this morning. They await your decision regarding quarters. The words hit Thorne with unexpected force. In the hours since the Market Square encounter, he had tried to push the image from his mind, the boy's trusting eyes, the woman's quiet dignity, despite her obvious exhaustion. Something about her presence had stirred memories he had buried, so deep he thought they were gone forever. "What do we know of them?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Very little, sire. The woman gave her name as Elena. She claims to be a widow, traveling from the eastern provinces with her son. No family, no destination beyond seeking honest work. Celeste's report was thorough, but revealed nothing that explained the strange pull Thorne felt toward these strangers. The boy, how old? Perhaps 7 years, maybe 8. He speaks little, but what he does say suggests they've traveled far and faced considerable hardship." Thorne closed his eyes briefly, remembering another child from long ago, one who had never drawn breath, who had taken his mother with him into the darkness that followed the difficult birth. That loss had changed everything, had turned a young king's heart to stone and his dreams to ash. "Provide them with quarters in the East Wing," he said finally. "See that they have warm clothes and regular meals. The boy, ensure he has access to the castle tutors if he wishes." "Your Majesty," Garrett's voice carried a note of caution, "it's unusual to grant such favor to strangers. The court will talk, and not all of it kindly." Thorne met his old friend's eyes, seeing decades of shared understanding there. Garrett had been with him through the worst of times, had watched him close his heart against further pain, had never questioned the walls he'd built around himself. But something had shifted today in that market square, something that all the wisdom of years couldn't quite explain. "Let them talk," Thorne said quietly. "I am still king here." The dismissal was gentle but final. His counsel departed with practiced efficiency, leaving him alone with the afternoon light filtering through the tall windows and the weight of decisions both made and yet to come. Thorne rose from his throne and walked to the window that overlooked the courtyard. Below, life continued its steady rhythm, guards changing shifts, servants going about their duties, children playing in the spaces between responsibility and worry. It was a good life, he knew, safer and more prosperous than most kingdoms could claim, but it was also a life built on the understanding that their king was a man to be feared rather than loved, respected rather than trusted with weakness. The Iron Crown felt heavier as he contemplated the choice he had made. Charity was not unknown in his kingdom, but personal involvement was. Kings maintained distance for good reason. Too much care for individuals weakened the resolve needed to protect the many. Yet something about the woman, Elena, and her son had slipped past defenses he'd thought impregnable. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter." Elena herself stood in the doorway, no longer the desperate figure from the morning, but still carrying herself with that same quiet dignity that had caught his attention. She had washed and changed into simple but clean clothes, and her son peeked out from behind her skirts with curious eyes. "Your Majesty," she said, offering a graceful curtsy that spoke of better days and proper education. "I wanted to thank you personally for your kindness. It's more than we dared hope for." Her voice was soft but clear, carrying an accent that suggested education and refinement. This was no common peasant woman, though her circumstances clearly spoke of recent hardship. "Think nothing of it," Thorne replied, though his eyes lingered on her face. Something about her features tugged at memory. The curve of her cheek, the way she held her head when she spoke. "I trust the quarters are adequate?" "More than adequate. We haven't slept in proper beds for..." She paused, as if measuring how much truth to reveal. "For some time." The boy stepped forward, no longer hidden behind his mother's protection. "Your Majesty, are you really the king who fought the dragon of Blackmoor?" Elena's cheeks colored with embarrassment. "Thomas, we discussed proper manners." "It's quite all right." Thorne found himself smiling, an expression that felt rusty from disuse. "No, young Thomas, that was my grandfather. though I did face down a rather angry bear once, if that helps." The boy's eyes widened with delight, and for a moment, Thorne caught a glimpse of what it might have been like to have a son of his own, someone to share stories with, to teach the difference between legend and truth, to prepare for the burdens and joys of life. "Perhaps," Elena said gently, "we should let His Majesty return to his duties. I'm sure ruling a kingdom requires more time than we should take." There was understanding in her words, the recognition of someone who knew what it meant to carry responsibility. Thorne found himself reluctant to see them go, though he couldn't explain why. "The evening meal is served in the Great Hall," he said. "You're welcome to join us if you wish. Or food can be brought to your quarters, whichever you prefer." "Thank you, Your Majesty. We wouldn't want to presume." "It's not presumption if the king invites you." His voice was firm but kind. "Besides, it's been too long since this castle." He heard a child's laughter. As they departed, Thorne remained at the window, watching the shadows lengthen across his kingdom. The iron crown caught the light, its weight both familiar and strange. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering what it might be like to share that weight with someone else, to have companions at his table who saw him as more than just the man who made the hard choices. The thought should have worried him. Instead, it filled him with something he had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. The great hall of Stoneheart Castle had seen many formal presentations over the years, but none quite like this one. Elena stood before the assembled court with her son at her side, no longer the desperate refugee from the market square, but a woman whose bearing suggested nobility despite her simple dress. The transformation was remarkable and deeply unsettling. To more than one member of the royal council, Thorne watched from his throne as murmurs rippled through the gathered nobles. Lady Celeste had insisted on the formal presentation, arguing that anyone granted royal quarters deserved proper introduction to the court. It was protocol, she had said, though Thorne suspected there were other motivations at work. "Your Majesty." "My lords and ladies," Celeste announced, her voice carrying clearly through the vaulted hall, "may I present Elena of Westmarch and her son, Thomas, recently granted sanctuary under the protection of the crown." Elena curtsied with practiced grace, and young Thomas attempted an awkward bow that earned gentle smiles from some of the assembled nobility. But Thorne found himself studying Elena's face in the better light of the hall, and what he saw there made his breath catch in his throat. The resemblance was impossible to ignore now that he truly looked at her. The delicate bone structure, the way her dark hair caught the light, the particular shade of her eyes. It was as if a ghost had walked into his hall, wearing flesh and blood. His hand unconsciously moved to his chest, where beneath his royal robes lay a locket he had not opened in 20 years. "From Westmarch, you say?" Lord Aldrich, one of his senior advisers, stepped forward with the calculated interest of a man who made it his business to know everyone of importance. "The province has been unsettled these past years. Difficult times for travel." "Indeed, my lord," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the scrutiny. "We found it necessary to seek opportunities elsewhere." "And your husband?" The question came from Lady Meredith, whose tone suggested more than casual curiosity. "Surely a woman of your evident breeding would not travel unescorted by choice." A shadow passed across Elena's features. "My husband fell defending our village from raiders, my lady. These are dangerous times for those who lack the protection of strong walls and armed men." Thorne felt something cold settle in his stomach. The borderlands had seen increased raider activity in recent years, often requiring military response from his forces. How many widows had his necessary orders created? How many children left fatherless in the name of protecting the greater kingdom? "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "The crown has perhaps not done enough to protect those in the outer provinces." Several council members shifted uncomfortably. It was unlike their king to express such sentiments publicly, and the admission of potential failure was unprecedented. "Your Majesty is most gracious," Elena replied, meeting his eyes directly. My husband understood the risks of defending what he loved. He would not have chosen differently, even knowing the cost. The simple dignity of her words hit Thorne harder than any accusation could have. Here was a woman who had lost everything, yet spoke without bitterness, who honored her husband's sacrifice even while struggling to survive its consequences. "Tell me," he found himself saying, "what was your husband's name? Perhaps we have records, widow's compensation, land grants for his service." "William, your majesty. William of Westmarch." She paused, then added quietly, "Though he was born here in Valdris before his family moved east." The name struck Thorne like a physical blow. William, he knew that name, knew it better than almost any other. His hand pressed harder against the hidden locket as memories he had tried to bury came flooding back. "William," he repeated, his voice strangely hollow. A common name, but Elena was watching him carefully now, and he saw recognition dawning in her winter blue eyes. "Yes, your majesty. He often spoke of his childhood here in the capital. He said he had family in the castle once, though that was long ago." The hall had grown quiet, sensing undercurrents they couldn't quite identify. Lord Commander Garrett stepped closer to the throne, his weathered face creased with concern for his king's obvious distress. Young Thomas, oblivious to the adult tensions swirling around him, spoke up with a child's innocent curiosity. "Mama, you said Papa had a brother who was important. Is he here? Can I meet him?" The silence that followed was deafening. Elena's face went pale as she realized what her son had inadvertently revealed. Several nobles exchanged glances, political calculations already beginning behind their carefully neutral expressions. Thorne's world tilted on its axis. William, his younger brother, who had left the castle in anger and heartbreak, 25. Years ago, after a bitter argument about duty and love and the choices that came with royal blood. William, who had chosen exile over accepting the marriage their father had arranged. William, who had walked away from his birthright and never looked back. William, who had apparently found love and happiness in the life he chose, only to die, defending it against raiders in conflicts Thorne's own policies had failed to prevent. "Your Majesty?" Garrett's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you well?" Thorne forced himself to focus on the present, on the woman and child standing before his throne, his brother's wife, his brother's son, family he had never known, existed, now looking to him for protection and sanctuary. "Elena," he said carefully, testing the weight of her name, "what was your husband's family name before he took residence in Westmarch?" She met his eyes directly, and he saw that she already knew the answer would change everything. "Blackthorne, your Majesty. Prince William Blackthorne." The admission sent shockwaves through the assembled court. Prince William had been declared dead years ago, his name spoken only in whispers, if at all. Most of the younger nobles had never known he existed, but the older members of the court remembered the scandal, the bitter family division that had nearly torn the kingdom apart. "Sweet, merciful gods," Lady Celeste breathed, her diplomatic composure finally cracking. Thorne rose from his throne, his legs unsteady as he descended the steps toward Elena and Thomas. His nephew. The boy was his nephew, carrying royal blood and his brother's eyes, and no knowledge of what that meant for his future. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" he asked, his voice thick with emotions he couldn't name. "Because," Elena said simply, "William made me promise never to use his name for advantage. He chose his path freely and wanted his son to earn his own way in the world. But when Thomas grew hungry, when we had nowhere else to turn," her voice broke slightly, "I thought perhaps family might show mercy where strangers would not." "Mercy?" Thorne repeated, the word tasting strange in his mouth. He had shown mercy that morning in the market square, but it had been to strangers. This was something else entirely: obligation, legacy, the settling of accounts he hadn't known existed. He knelt before Thomas, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. His nephew had William's stubborn chin and their mother's gentle eyes, combined with something uniquely his own, a resilience born of hardship and a trust that spoke well of his upbringing. "Thomas," he said gently, "your father was my brother. That makes you my nephew, and this castle your heritage as much as mine." The boy looked confused but not frightened. "Does that mean we can stay? Mama's been worried about finding work and a place to live." "Yes," Thorne said, his voice stronger. "Now, you can stay. This is your home." He stood and faced his court, seeing calculation and concern in equal measure on their faces. The political implications were staggering. A royal heir, previously unknown, with potential claims to the throne. A woman of obvious intelligence, and grace who might influence the king's decisions. Changes to the careful balance of power that had kept the kingdom stable for decades. "My lords and ladies," he announced formally, "I present Prince Thomas Blackthorne, son of my late brother, William, and his mother Elena, Princess of Valdris by marriage and right." The titles transformed them instantly from refugees to royalty, but Thorne could see the weight of that change settling on Elena's shoulders. She had asked for sanctuary and received a crown she hadn't wanted. "Your Majesty," Lord Aldrich said carefully, "this is indeed momentous news. Perhaps we should discuss the implications later." Thorne cut him off. "Princess Elena and Prince Thomas have had a difficult journey. They need rest and time to adjust to their new circumstances." As the court began to disperse, their conversations, carefully hushed but undoubtedly intense, Thorne found himself alone with Elena and Thomas. The great hall felt different now, filled with ghosts and possibilities he hadn't considered an hour before. "I never wanted this," Elena said quietly once they were alone. "William warned me it might come to this someday, but I hoped—" "I know," Thorne replied, "but wanting and needing are different things. My brother chose his path, and I respected it even when I disagreed with it. Now you and Thomas need protection that only royal status can provide." "And the price?" Elena asked, because she was clearly too intelligent not to understand that everything came with a cost. Thorne looked at his nephew, who was examining the intricate carvings on a nearby pillar with fascination, and thought about the lonely years stretching behind him and the uncertain future ahead. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but whatever it is, we'll face it together. That's what family does." The words felt strange coming from a man who had been alone for so long, but they also felt right in a way that surprised him. For the first time in decades, the Iron Crown felt less like a burden and more like a responsibility worth sharing. The east wing of Stoneheart Castle had been closed for years, its chambers gathering dust, while the king lived in solitary simplicity in his own quarters. Now servants hurried through the corridors with fresh linens and oil for the lamps, preparing rooms that would house royalty once again. Thorne personally oversaw the arrangements, something that raised eyebrows among the staff who were accustomed to their king delegating such domestic concerns. "The princess should have the blue chamber," he instructed Mrs. Adelaide, the head of household staff. "It has the best view of the gardens and catches the morning light, and the adjoining room. For Prince Thomas, he'll want to be close to his mother." Mrs. Adelaide, a woman who had served the castle for 40 years and remembered when Prince William was a boy racing through these same halls, nodded with understanding. "Of course, Your Majesty. And should we prepare a nursery as well? In case the prince prefers—" "Ask him," Thorne said simply. "He's old enough to have preferences, and it's his home now." The concept of consulting a child on matters of household arrangement was foreign to castle protocol. But Mrs. Adelaide had learned long ago that their king's unconventional moments often yielded the best results. She curtsied and went about her duties with the efficiency that had made her indispensable. Thorne found himself walking the corridors of the East Wing, running his hands along walls that had once echoed with his brother's laughter. William had been the younger son by 5 years, born into a world where Thorne's path to the throne was already assured. It should have made things easier for both of them. Thorne could focus on preparing to rule, while William enjoyed the freedoms that came with being the spare rather than the heir. Instead, it had created a gulf between them that widened with each passing year. Thorne had embraced duty and sacrifice, while William had chased dreams and love. When their father had attempted to arrange a political marriage for William, the younger prince had chosen exile over compliance, leaving behind harsh words and a broken family that never quite healed. A soft knock on the chamber door pulled him from his memories. Elena stood in the doorway with Thomas, both of them looking slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of their new accommodations. "Your Majesty," Elena said, "I wanted to thank you again, but also to discuss, well, the practicalities of our situation." "Of course. Please come in." Thorne gestured to the sitting area near the window, where afternoon light filtered through glass that cost more than most families saw in a year. "I imagine this is quite an adjustment." Thomas immediately gravitated toward the window, pressing his nose against the glass to stare down at the castle gardens below. "Mama, look, there's a maze down there, and I think I saw a peacock." Eleanor smiled at her son's excitement, but Thorne could see the worry lines around her eyes. "Thomas has never lived in such luxury. I'm concerned about expectations, behavior, the protocols we don't know." "He's a child," Thorne said gently. "He should run and play and make noise. This castle has been too quiet for too long." "But he's also a prince now," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying the weight of that transformation. "People will watch him, judge us both. I don't want to embarrass you or damage your reputation by not knowing how things should be done." Thorne studied her face, seeing the intelligence and pride that had helped her survive the journey from Westmarch. "Tell me about your life before. You carry yourself like nobility, speak like someone with education that wasn't learned in a village." Elena settled into her chair, smoothing her skirts with nervous hands. "My father was a merchant, successful, enough to afford tutors and proper schooling for his daughters. I learned languages, history, the social graces expected of a woman who might marry well. Then I met William." "How?" A genuine smile softened her features. "He was traveling through our town, claiming to be a horse trader. He had excellent horses but terrible business sense, kept giving them away to families who needed them more than they could afford to pay. My father thought he was either the most generous fool he'd ever met or the worst criminal. And you?" "I thought he was the kindest man I'd ever encountered, also the most stubborn. When I tried to teach him proper accounting, he said numbers were cold things that shouldn't be allowed to make people suffer." Elena's laugh held both fondness and pain. "He never did learn to balance a ledger properly." Thorne felt a complex mix of emotions: grief for the brother he had lost, regret for the years they had wasted in silence, and something that might have been envy for the love William had found. He was always like that. Even as a boy, he'd give away his dessert to the kitchen cats and then wonder why they followed him everywhere. "He spoke of you sometimes," Elena said quietly, "with respect, but also with sadness. He regretted the way things ended between you." The words hit Thorne harder than he expected. He had spent 25 years telling himself that William had made his choice and would live with the consequences. He had never allowed himself to consider that his brother might have missed their family as much as they had missed him. "I regretted it too," he admitted. "But pride is a powerful thing, and kingship requires so much of it that sometimes there's little room for anything else." Thomas had discovered that the window opened onto a small balcony and was attempting to reach the latch. Elena started to rise to stop him, but Thorne waved her back. "Thomas," he called, "would you like to see the gardens properly? We could walk through them after dinner." The boy spun around, eyes bright with excitement. "Really? Could we see the maze and the peacocks?" "Absolutely, but perhaps we should also discuss your education while we're walking. Princes need to learn many things: reading, writing, mathematics, history." "I can read already," Thomas said proudly. "Mama taught me, and I know my numbers up to 100. "Impressive. What about sword work?" Eleanor's expression shifted to concern. "Your Majesty." He's still very young, old enough to learn the basics, not to fight, but to understand balance and movement and discipline. It's part of his heritage. Thorne's voice was gentle but firm. I won't have him grow up defenseless in a world that can be dangerous. William tried to teach him a little, Elena said reluctantly, but I haven't been able to continue those lessons. The reminder of her loss brought a moment of somber quiet to the room. Thorne found himself studying this woman who had loved. His brother, who had raised his nephew with such obvious care despite their hardships. She was beautiful, certainly, but it was her strength that impressed him most. The way she had protected her son while grieving her husband, had traveled dangerous roads seeking a better life, had maintained her dignity even when asking for help. There's something else we need to discuss, he said carefully. The court's reaction to your arrival. Not everyone will be pleased by this development. Eleanor's expression grew serious. Political complications? Thomas has royal blood. In the eyes of the law, he's my heir until I father children of my own. Thorne saw her face pale and hurried to reassure her. I have no intention of setting him aside or treating him as a threat, but others might see opportunity in his position or danger in mine. What kind of danger? The kind that comes when people start wondering if a young prince might make a better king than an aging one, or when they calculate the advantages of controlling that prince's regency. Thorne's voice carried the weight of years spent navigating court intrigue. You and Thomas are under my protection, but that protection works both ways. Your actions reflect on the crown now. Eleanor straightened in her chair, and Thorne caught a glimpse of the steel beneath her gentle exterior. I understand. What do you need from us? Patience while you learn our ways. Caution in your friendships. Not everyone who offers kindness has pure motives. And trust that I will guide you through the complexities of court life. And in return, Thorne considered the question, realizing he wasn't entirely sure himself. Honesty, companionship, perhaps the chance to be an uncle as well as a king. Thomas had grown bored with the adult conversation and wandered over to a bookshelf, running his small fingers along the leather spines. Uncle Thorne, he said, testing the title. Do you have any books about dragons? The casual use of the familial. Her dress sent warmth through Thorne's chest that he hadn't expected. I believe we do. The castle library has stories about all manner of creatures. Dragons, knights, brave princes who saved kingdoms. Were any of them real? Some. Others are stories people tell to remember what's important. Courage, kindness, protecting those who can't protect themselves. Thomas nodded solemnly, as if filing away this wisdom for future use. Elena watched the interaction with careful attention, and Thorne realized she was studying him as much as he was studying her, learning his character, assessing whether she could trust him with her son's future. A servant appeared in the doorway. With a respectful bow, Your Majesty, Lord Commander Garrett requests an audience at your convenience. Thorne sighed internally. The day's revelations would require extensive discussion with his council, planning for the changes that Thomas and Elena's presence would bring to court life and succession planning. Tell him I'll join him shortly. He turned back to Elena. And, Thomas, duty calls, I'm afraid, but we'll have that walk through the gardens after dinner. Mrs. Adelaide will help you with anything you need. As he moved toward the door, Elena's voice stopped him. Your Majesty, Thorne, thank you, not just for the kindness, but for wanting to know us. William would be grateful that his son will know his family. Thorne paused, his hand on the doorframe. I'm the one who should be grateful. This castle has been too empty for too long. Perhaps it's time that changed. Walking back toward his own quarters, Thorne felt a strange lightness in his step. The political complications would be significant, the gossip intensive, and the changes to his carefully ordered life considerable. But for the first time in decades, the prospect of change didn't feel like a burden. It felt like hope. The carved wooden horse was small enough to fit in Thomas's palm, its paint worn smooth by countless hours of handling. Elena watched her son arrange the toy carefully on the windowsill of their new chamber, placing it where the morning light would touch it first. a ritual he had maintained through all their travels, all their hardships. "Papa made this for me," Thomas had explained to anyone who asked, his voice carrying the reverence children reserved for treasures beyond price. "He said, 'Horses remember the way home, even when we forget.'" Elena's heart tightened as she watched him now, 3 days into their residence at Stoneheart Castle. William had carved that horse during the long winter before Thomas's birth, his hands working the wood while she sewed baby clothes, and they dreamed of the future. He had wanted their child to have something made with love, something that would connect him to his father, no matter where life took them. Neither of them had imagined it would take them here, to the very castle William had left behind, in anger and pride. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. King Thorne stood in the doorway, no longer the formal ruler from their first encounters, but a man who seemed to be discovering how to be an uncle. Over the past few days, he had taken to visiting them in the evenings, sometimes bringing books. For Thomas, sometimes simply talking with Elena about castle life and the adjustments they were making. "Good morning," he said, his eyes finding Thomas immediately. "Are you ready for your first lesson with Master Aldwin?" Thomas looked up from his toy, excitement and nervousness warring in his expression. "The sword master? Really? Really? Though, today will be mostly standing and balance, proper stance, how to hold a practice blade without hurting yourself or others. Nothing dangerous." Eleanor felt the familiar clutch of worry that had become her constant companion since William's death. Every new experience for Thomas carried the weight of his father's absence, the knowledge that she alone was responsible for preparing him for a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. "Perhaps I should come along," she said, "to observe." "Of course," Thorne agreed immediately. "Though I should warn you, Master Aldwin is somewhat traditional in his views about women and weapons training, meaning he believes a lady's place is in the solo with her embroidery, not the practice yards with the men." Thorne's expression suggested his own views were rather different, but he's also the finest sword master in the kingdom, and Thomas will benefit from his instruction. They made their way through the castle corridors, Thomas practically bouncing with excitement, while Elena struggled with emotions she couldn't quite name. Pride in her son's eagerness to learn, fear for his safety, grief that William wasn't here to guide his first lessons, and something else. A growing awareness of how different their lives had become in just a few short days. The practice yard was a large courtyard, surrounded by high walls, its packed earth surface marked with the scuffs and stains of countless training sessions. Master Aldwin proved to be a grizzled man in his 60s, his beard more white than grey, and his body still carrying the solid strength of a lifetime warrior. "So this is the young prince," he said, studying Thomas with the critical eye of someone who had trained 2 generations of nobility. Small for his age, but that can be an advantage. Quick learners often make the best swordsmen. Thomas stood straighter under the assessment, clearly wanting to make a good impression. Elena felt a surge of protective love, watching him try so hard to be brave. "Now then, Your Highness," Master Aldwin continued, "what do you know of sword?" "Work. Papa taught me a little," Thomas said proudly. "He said the sword is like a dance partner. You have to listen to what it wants to do." The old swordmaster's eyebrows rose slightly. "Did he now? And what else did your father teach you?" "That courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared but doing what's right anyway. And that protecting people is more important than winning." Elena's breath caught. Those were William's words exactly. Lessons he had shared during their quiet moments together while teaching Thomas to whittle or showing him how to care for their horse. She had thought Thomas too young to remember such conversations, but clearly her son had absorbed more than she realized. Master Aldwin glanced at King Thorne with something that might have been approval. Prince William always was wise beyond his years, even as a boy. "Very well, young prince. Let's see if you can apply your father's wisdom to holding a blade." The lesson proceeded with careful attention to basics: stance, grip, balance. Thomas struggled at first with the weight of even a practiced sword, but his determination was evident. Elena found herself watching King Thorne as much as her son, noting how the king's eyes never left Thomas, how he offered quiet encouragement when the boy grew frustrated, how he seemed to find genuine pleasure in his nephew's small victories. "Your Majesty," Master Aldwin said during a break, "the boy has good instincts. With proper training, he could become quite skilled." "See that he gets it," Thorne replied. "But remember, he's still a child. I want him to learn discipline and confidence, not bloodlust." "Of course, sire, though I should mention there have been inquiries from some of the younger lords about the prince's training schedule. Lord Marcus's son in particular seems eager to spar with his new cousin." Elena saw Thorne's expression tighten slightly. "And what did you tell them? That the prince will train with appropriate partners when I deem him ready, and not before." The old swordmaster's tone brooked no argument, though it might be wise to consider the politics of such decisions. After the lesson, as they walked back toward the castle, Thomas chattered excitedly about everything he had learned, while Elena wrestled with the implications of what she had overheard. Even here, in what should have been the safety of family, her son's position would be complicated by the ambitions and calculations of others. "You're troubled," Thorne observed, as Thomas ran ahead to examine an interesting stone carving. "Lord Marcus's son," Elena said quietly. "Is he someone I should be concerned about?" "Not the boy himself. He's only 12 and seems pleasant enough. But his father is ambitious, and having his son befriend the heir apparent would be advantageous. For their family." Thorne's voice carried the weariness of someone who had navigated such politics for decades. "It's the nature of court life, I'm afraid. Every friendship, every alliance, every casual conversation can have deeper meaning. How do I protect Thomas from that without making him suspicious of everyone he meets?" It was a question that went to the heart of Elena's fears about their new life. She wanted her son to retain his open, trusting nature, but she also understood that naivety could be dangerous in a world where people would use a child's innocence for their own ends. "Carefully," Thorne said after a moment, "with guidance and gradual education about the realities of power, and with the understanding that not every gesture of friendship is calculated. Some people are simply kind." They paused to watch Thomas, who had discovered a cat sunning itself on a stone bench and was attempting to coax it closer with gentle words and patient movements. The sight made Elena smile despite her worries. "He has his father's way with creatures," she said fondly. "William could gentle the most skittish horse or coax birds to eat from his hand." "I remember," Thorne replied, his voice soft with memory. "He once spent 3 days nursing an injured raven back to health, keeping it in his chambers despite our father's displeasure. When it was well enough to fly again, he carried it to the highest tower and released it personally." "What happened?" "To drive you apart?" Eleanor asked, then immediately regretted the question. "I'm sorry. It's not my place to ask." "No, it's a fair question. You have a right to understand the family history." Thorne was quiet for a long moment, watching Thomas's patient efforts with the cat. "Our father arranged a marriage for William, a political alliance with a neighboring kingdom. The girl was pleasant enough, but William was already in love with someone else. When he refused the betrothal, father threatened to disinherit him. And you supported your father's decision." "I thought William was being selfish." "I had accepted my own arranged marriage without complaint. It was duty, obligation, the price of being born royal." Thorne's voice carried old pain. "I told him to stop acting like a child and accept his responsibilities." Eleanor felt a chill. "Your arranged marriage. What happened to your wife?" "She died in childbirth, along with our son, 6 months after William left the kingdom." The words were matter of fact, but Elena could hear the grief beneath them. "I learned too late that love is not weakness, that choosing heart over duty sometimes requires more courage than following orders." "Did you ever try to contact William after that?" "Pride," Thorne said simply. and the belief that he was happier without us. I see now that I was wrong on both counts. The cat had finally allowed Thomas to pet it and was purring loudly enough to be heard from several feet away. Thomas's delighted laughter echoed off the castle walls, a sound that seemed to lighten the very air around them. "He's brought joy back to this place," Thorne observed. "I hadn't realized how much we needed it." Elena studied the king's profile, seeing past the crown and the authority to the man beneath, lonely, burdened by years of difficult choices, trying to learn how to be family again after decades of ruling alone. "It works both ways," she said gently. "Thomas needs male guidance, someone to teach him about strength and responsibility. I've done my best, but there are things a mother can't provide." "And you?" Thorne asked, turning to meet her eyes. "What do you need?" The question caught her off guard, with its directness and its implication that her needs mattered beyond her role as Thomas's mother and William's widow. She had spent so long focused on survival, on protecting her son, and honoring her husband's memory, that she had barely considered what she might want for herself. "Safety," she said finally. "Peace. The chance to watch Thomas grow up without fear." She paused, then added more quietly, "And perhaps the opportunity to be useful again, to contribute something meaningful rather than simply accepting charity." "This isn't charity," Thorne said firmly. "You're family, and family takes care of its own. But if you're interested in contributing more actively to court life, there are certainly opportunities. The kingdom could benefit from your intelligence and perspective." Before Elena could respond, Thomas came running back with the cat draped contentedly across his arms. "Look, she likes me. Can we keep her, please?" Elena started to explain why taking in strays might not be appropriate for royal princes, but Thorne intervened with a smile. "What's her name?" "I don't know. She doesn't have a collar." Thomas looked suddenly worried. "Do you think she belongs to someone?" "I think," Thorne said gravely, "that she belongs to whoever she chooses to stay with, and it appears she's chosen you. Perhaps you should give her a name and make it official." "Really? I can keep her?" Thomas's joy was radiant. "I'll call her Whiskers, and I'll take very good care of her, I promise." As they continued back to the castle with Thomas, chattering happily to his new pet, Elena found herself thinking about choices and chances, about the unexpected ways life could change direction. A week ago, she had been a desperate widow with nowhere to turn. Now she was a princess in a castle, watching her son flourish under the attention of an uncle who seemed determined to make up for 25 years of absence. The wooden horse in Thomas's pocket represented his connection to the father he had lost. But perhaps it was time to start building new connections, new memories, new reasons to hope for the future. The cat began to purr again, and Elena decided that might be the most hopeful sound she had heard in a very long time. The war map in King. Thorne's private study told the story of 2 decades in careful notations and colored pins. Each mark represented a battle fought, a village defended, a threat neutralized in the endless effort to keep Valdris safe from the conflicts that raged beyond its borders. Elena stood before it now, her finger tracing the eastern routes that led to Westmarch, understanding for the first time the full scope of decisions that had shaped her life from a distance. "This one," she said quietly, pointing to a red pin near a village whose name she recognized. "The raid on Millbrook. That's where William—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Thorne understood. 3 years ago," he said, his voice heavy with memory. "We received word too late to send proper reinforcements. By the time our riders arrived, the raiders had already struck and fled back across the border." Eleanor's hand trembled slightly. As she traced the route the raiders would have taken, the path that had led to her husband's death and her son's father being lost forever. How many others? Too many. Thorne moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and warm in the cool morning air of the study. "Every pin on this map represents families destroyed, children left orphaned, lives changed forever by violence." We couldn't prevent or arrive too late to stop. The weight of that knowledge settled between them, the understanding that ruling meant making impossible choices, that protection for some often came at the cost of others, that good intentions couldn't always overcome the harsh realities of distance and time. "Do you blame me," Thorne asked quietly, "for not being there when William needed help?" Elena turned to study his face, seeing the genuine pain there, the burden of responsibility he carried for every loss marked on that map. William knew the risks when he chose to defend Millbrook. He could have fled with the other survivors, but he stayed to give the families time to escape. That was his choice, made freely. But if I had stationed more patrols in the eastern provinces, then perhaps other villages would have fallen instead. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "I've learned something about impossible choices these past years. Sometimes there are no good options, only necessary ones." They stood in companionable silence, both lost in thoughts of might-have-beens and the complex mathematics of protection and sacrifice. Through the tall windows, the sounds of castle life continued, guards changing shifts, servants going about their duties. Thomas's laughter echoing from the gardens where he was playing with his new cat. "The border tensions are escalating again," Thorne said eventually, pointing to several new markers along the northern frontier. "Ravenclaw activity has increased significantly over the past month. My scouts report larger groups, better organization. Bolder strikes, what does that mean for us here? Probably nothing immediate. Stoneheart is well defended, and we have early warning systems in place, but it means I may need to ride out with a force to deal with the threat before it grows larger." Thorne's expression was troubled. "The timing is inconvenient." Elena understood his meaning. Leaving the capital now, so soon after revealing Thomas's existence and her own royal status, would create opportunities for political maneuvering in his absence. The court was still adjusting to the new dynamics, still calculating how the presence of an heir and his mother might affect their own positions and ambitions. "How long would you be gone?" "Difficult to say. 2 weeks, perhaps 3, depending on what we find and how much fighting is required." Thorne moved to his desk, shuffling through reports with the practiced efficiency of a man accustomed to managing crisis. "Lord Commander Garrett would remain here with a strong garrison, and my council would handle routine matters. But you and Thomas would be more vulnerable without my direct protection, and there are members of my court who might see opportunity in that vulnerability." Elena felt a familiar chill of fear, the same instinct that had kept her and Thomas alive during their dangerous journey to Valdris. What kind of opportunity? The kind that comes from controlling access to a young prince, or influencing the decisions of a woman still learning the complexities of court politics? Thorne's voice carried the weight of years spent navigating such treacherous waters. "Not everyone who offers friendship has pure motives." "You're referring to someone specific?" "Lord Marcus, primarily. His eldest son, Edmund, has been particularly eager to befriend Thomas, and his wife, Lady Beatrice, has made several overtures toward you. Separately, either might be genuine. Together, they suggest a coordinated effort to gain influence." Elena thought about the interactions she'd had with Lady Beatrice over the past week. The woman's seemingly casual questions about Elena's plans, her suggestions about suitable companions for Thomas, her offers to help navigate the social complexities of court life. What had seemed like kindness now took on more calculating overtones. "What should I do?" "Be polite but cautious. Accept no major decisions or commitments in my absence. And trust your instincts. You've survived too much to doubt them now." Thorne moved closer, his presence reassuring in its steadiness. "You're stronger than you know, Eleanor. William chose well when he chose you." The mention of her late husband brought a familiar ache, but also something else, a growing awareness that her grief was beginning to make room for other emotions. Watching Thorne with Thomas, seeing his patience and growing affection for the boy, observing his careful attention to their comfort and security, She found herself noticing things that had nothing to do with royal protection and everything to do with the man beneath the crown. He would want Thomas to know his family, she said. Despite the pain of his exile, William never stopped loving you. He understood why you disagreed with his choices, even if he couldn't change his mind about them. I was wrong, Thorne said simply, about duty, about the relative importance of political alliances versus personal happiness. I learned that lesson too late to save my own marriage, but perhaps not too late to help Thomas choose better when his time comes. He's still a child. Children grow faster than we expect, especially in royal families. The decisions we make now about his education, his friendships, his understanding of responsibility will shape the man he becomes. Thorne's gaze drifted toward the window where Thomas could be seen teaching Whiskers to chase a ball of yarn. I want him to be strong enough to protect what matters to him, wise enough to know what that is, and brave enough to choose love over fear when the time comes. Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that this conversation was about more than just Thomas's future. And you? What do you choose? The question hung between them, charged with implications neither was quite ready to address. Directly, Thorne met her eyes, and she saw in them a man discovering that the heart he thought had died with his first family might still be capable of feeling after all. I choose to protect what matters to me, he said finally, even if that means risking everything I've built to do it. A commotion in the courtyard below interrupted the moment. Through the window, they could see guards assembling in formation, while a messenger's horse stood lathered with sweat from hard riding. Whatever news had arrived was urgent enough to demand immediate attention. Thorne moved to the window, his expression shifting from personal to royal as he assessed the situation. Border news, by the look of it, and not good news, judging by the speed of that ride. Elena joined him at the window, watching as Lord Commander Garrett emerged from the castle to receive the messenger's report. Even from a distance, she could see the grim set of the older man's shoulders as he listened to whatever information was being delivered. The choice about riding out may have been made for me, Thorne observed quietly, which means our conversation about protecting what matters is about to become much more practical and immediate. As if summoned by his words, a sharp knock came at the study door. "Your Majesty," came Garrett's voice, urgent but controlled. "We need to speak immediately. The situation has changed." Thorne straightened, the weight of kingship settling back onto his shoulders like a familiar cloak. But before he moved toward the door, he caught Elena's hand briefly in his own. "Remember what I said about trusting your instincts, and remember that you're not alone here. You have allies, even if they're not always easy to identify." Elena nodded, understanding that whatever news waited outside that door would test everything they had been discussing. The comfortable interlude of learning to be family was about to collide with the harsh realities of ruling a kingdom under threat. But for the first time since William's death, she didn't feel afraid of facing those realities. She felt ready. The unfinished letter lay hidden between the pages of a book of poetry, its edges yellowed with age and its ink faded to brown. Elena had discovered it by accident while exploring the small library in her chambers, searching for something to read to Thomas before bed. The book had fallen open to reveal folded parchment, and curiosity had overcome propriety before she could stop herself. "My dearest heart," the letter began in Thorne's careful handwriting. "I write this, knowing I may never find the courage to send it, but needing to speak these words even if only to empty pages. The physicians say you grow weaker each day, and I am powerless to help you. All my strength, all my authority, all the fear I inspire in others, none of it can touch this enemy that steals you from me, bit by bit." Eleanor's hands trembled as she read, understanding that she was seeing into the most private moments of a man who had learned to guard his heart so carefully that few suspected it existed at all. The letter was clearly written during his wife's final illness, a desperate outpouring of love and grief from a much younger king who had not yet learned to bury his emotions beneath the weight of duty. I dream sometimes of running away with you, of finding some distant place where crowns and kingdoms matter less than the sound of your laughter. I know it is foolish. We both understood the bargains we made when we accepted our arranged marriage. But somewhere between duty and necessity, I found something I never expected to discover. I found love. The words blurred as Elena's eyes filled with tears. She should stop reading, should respect Thorne's privacy, and return the letter to its hiding place. But the pain in those carefully formed sentences spoke to her own experiences of love and loss, creating a connection across the years between her grief for William and his sorrow for a woman whose name she didn't even know. If I lose you, I think, I shall never risk loving anyone again. The price is too high, the pain too great. Better to be the cold king they already believe me to be than to open my heart to such agony again. But oh, my darling, what a life we might have had if we had been born to different circumstances. Mama! Thomas's voice from the doorway made Elena start, quickly folding the letter and slipping it back into the book. You look sad. Are you thinking about Papa again? Elena wiped her eyes and managed a smile for her son. A little, yes, but also thinking about how love can be both wonderful and difficult at the same time. Thomas climbed onto the window seat beside her, whiskers purring in his arms. At 8 years old, he was beginning to understand that adults carried sorrows he couldn't yet comprehend, but his response was still purely that of a child who wanted to comfort his mother. Uncle Thorne says Papa was very brave, he offered. He says brave people are sad sometimes because they love things enough to fight for them. The simple wisdom of that statement, filtered through a child's understanding, made Elena's chest tighten with a complex mix of emotions. Thorne had been spending time with Thomas every evening, sharing stories and gentle lessons about courage and responsibility. She hadn't realized how much of their conversation had focused on William's memory and the kind of man Thomas should aspire to become. Your uncle is very wise, she said, pulling Thomas closer. And he's right about your father. Papa fought for what he loved, and that made him brave even when he was frightened. Do you think Uncle Thorne gets frightened sometimes? Elena considered the question, thinking about the man she was coming to know beneath the royal facade, the loneliness she glimpsed in unguarded moments, the careful way he approached emotional connections, the weight of responsibility that never seemed to leave his shoulders. I think everyone gets frightened sometimes, even kings, but brave people don't let fear stop them from doing what's right, like how Uncle Thorne helped us, even though the other lords didn't want him to. Elena's attention sharpened. What do you mean, sweetheart? I heard Lord Marcus talking to Lady Beatrice in the garden yesterday. They said Uncle Thorne was making mistakes because of us, and that kings shouldn't let their feelings make them weak. Thomas's expression was troubled in the way of children who overhear adult conversations they don't fully understand. Did we make Uncle Thorne weak? Eleanor felt a surge of anger at the adults who would discuss such matters where a child might overhear, but she kept her voice calm and reassuring. No, Thomas, you and I didn't make your uncle weak. If anything, having family has made him stronger. But Lord Marcus doesn't understand everything about strength and weakness. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is choose to care about others, even when it's difficult or complicated. Thomas seemed to accept this explanation, but Elena's mind was racing. The conversation he had overheard suggested that the political maneuvering she and Thorne had discussed was already more advanced than either of them had realized. Lord Marcus and his wife were clearly positioning themselves to take advantage of any perceived weakness in the king's position. A soft knock at the chamber door interrupted her thoughts. To her surprise, it was Thorne himself, looking unusually informal in a simple tunic rather than his royal robes. I hope I'm not intruding, he said. I wanted to discuss tomorrow's departure with you both. Elena's heart sank. The border situation had continued to deteriorate, and Thorne's departure with a significant force was now inevitable. They had spent the morning finalizing arrangements for the governance of the kingdom in his absence, but the personal implications were still settling in. "How long will you be gone?" Thomas asked, his young voice carrying a note of anxiety that made both adults' hearts clench. "I'm not certain, but I promise to return as quickly as possible." Thorne settled into a chair across from them, his expression gentle despite the steel Eleanor could see beneath it. "While I'm away, you'll need to be the man of the family, Thomas. That means taking care of your mother and following the instructions of those I've left to protect you." "I will," Thomas said solemnly, puffing up with the importance of his assigned responsibility. "I won't let anyone hurt Mama." "I know you won't. You have your father's brave heart." Thorne's gaze met Elena's over Thomas's head, and she saw both affection and concern there. "And your mother is stronger than she knows, but you'll both need to be very careful while I'm gone." "Because of Lord Marcus?" Thomas asked innocently. Thorne's expression sharpened. "What do you know about Lord Marcus?" Elena quickly explained what Thomas had overheard, watching Thorne's face grow grimmer with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, clearly recalculating the level of threat they might face in his absence. "I want you both to understand something," he said finally, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "You are under my protection, and that protection extends even when I'm not physically present. Anyone who attempts to harm or manipulate, either of you will answer to me personally upon my return." "What if they try anyway?" Elena asked quietly. "Then you remind them that I have a very long memory and very little patience for those who threaten my family." Thorne's smile was sharp as a blade. "But I don't expect it to come to that. Lord Commander Garrett will be watching, and he has instructions to take immediate action if anyone oversteps their bounds." He reached into his tunic and withdrew a small object, which he handed to Thomas with ceremony. It was a ring bearing the royal seal, sized for a child's finger. "This is for you," Thorne said. "It marks you as my acknowledged heir and places you under the direct protection of the crown. Wear it always, and remember that it carries both privilege and responsibility." Thomas stared at the ring with wide eyes, understanding instinctively that this was more than just a gift. It was a symbol of his place in the world and his future obligations. "Will I be king someday?" he asked in a small voice. "Perhaps," Thorne said honestly. "That depends on many things that haven't been decided yet. But whether you wear a crown or not, you will always be a prince, and that means serving others before yourself." Elena watched her son slip the ring onto his finger, seeing how the small gesture transformed him subtly but noticeably. The game of being a prince was becoming the reality of royal responsibility, and she felt both pride and fear at how readily Thomas seemed to accept that transformation. "There's something else," Thorne said, turning to Elena. "I've spoken with Mrs. Adelaide about increasing security around your quarters, and I've arranged for Sir Geoffrey to escort you whenever you leave the castle grounds. He's young but competent, and absolutely loyal to the crown. Is that necessary?" "I hope not, but I prefer caution to regret, especially where you and Thomas are concerned." Thorne's voice softened. "I need to know you're safe if I'm to focus on the threats at our borders." Elena nodded, understanding the practical necessity even as she chafed slightly at the restrictions. "We'll be careful, and we'll be here when you return." "See that you are," Thorne said, but his tone was warm rather than commanding. "This castle has been empty too long. I've grown accustomed to hearing life within its walls again." As he prepared to leave, Thomas suddenly ran to him and wrapped his small arms around the king's waist in an impulsive hug. Elena saw surprise, and deep emotion crossed Thorne's face as he returned the embrace, his large hands gentle on the boy's shoulders. "Come back safe, Uncle Thorne," Thomas whispered. "I'll take good care of Mama, I promise." "I know you will," Thorne replied, his voice slightly hoarse. "And I promise to come back to you both." After he left, Eleanor sat holding the book of poetry, feeling the weight of the hidden letter and the greater weight of the feelings it had revealed. Tomorrow, Thorne would ride out to face unknown dangers, while she and Thomas remained behind, to navigate the treacherous currents of court politics without his protection. But for the first time since William's death, Elena found herself praying not just for safety, but for someone's safe return. The thought should have frightened her. Caring for someone always carried the risk of loss. Instead, it felt like the first step toward healing, toward building something new from the pieces of what had been broken. The letter had shown her that Thorne understood love and loss as deeply as she did. Perhaps that shared understanding might be the foundation for something neither of them had expected to find again. The secret letter arrived 3 days after Thorne's departure, delivered by a messenger who claimed to represent the provincial archives in Westmarch. Elena received it in the castle's solar, where she had been attempting to focus on embroidery while Thomas attended his lessons with the castle's scholar. The routine of normal life felt strange without Thorne's presence, like a song missing its harmony. "My lady," the messenger said with a respectful bow, "I carry correspondence from the archive keeper regarding your late husband's military service records. There appears to have been some confusion about his identity that requires clarification." Elena accepted the sealed parchment with growing unease. William had been meticulous about his papers, always careful to maintain the fiction of his assumed identity. What confusion could have arisen now, years after his death? She broke the seal and unfolded the letter, expecting routine, bureaucratic language about pension payments or memorial records. Instead, she found her world tilting on its axis with the first sentence. "Lady Elena, it is my duty to inform you that recent examination of military records from the border conflicts has revealed discrepancies in the documentation of your late husband's service. The man known as William of Westmarch appears to have served under an assumed name, with his true identity carefully concealed through forged documents and witness testimony. Our investigation has revealed that your husband was, in fact, Prince William Blackthorne of Valdris, second son of King Magnus, and younger brother to the current king. This information was corroborated through sealed records left in our keeping by Prince William himself, to be opened only in the event of his death or the discovery of his true identity." Elena's hands began to shake. She read the words again, then a third time, but their meaning remained unchanged. Everyone at Stoneheart already knew William's true identity. That wasn't the source of her shock. It was what came next. Among Prince William's effects was a letter addressed to his wife, to be delivered only if his identity was discovered. In this letter, he reveals information about his family history that he apparently felt unable to share during his lifetime. Specifically, he discloses that he and King Thorne shared the same father but different mothers, making them half-brothers rather than full siblings. The parchment crackled as Elena's grip tightened. "Half-brothers," she read, on with growing horror. According to Prince William's testimony, King Thorne's mother, Queen Isabel, died when Thorne was 12 years old. King Magnus subsequently remarried a woman named Lady Catherine, who gave birth to Prince William 5 years later. However, court records show that King Magnus was already married to Lady Catherine before Queen Isabel's death, making Prince William legitimate and his older brother the bastard heir. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. If William's letter was accurate, then Thorne's entire claim to the throne was built on a lie. The legitimate heir to Valdris had died defending a village, while the bastard son ruled from a castle, never knowing the truth of his parentage. But there was more. Prince William's letter indicates that he discovered this information shortly before his exile from court, when he was investigating family documents in preparation for his arranged marriage. According to his account, he attempted to share this discovery with his half-brother, believing that Thorne deserved to know the truth. King Magnus, however, intercepted their conversation and threatened William with death if he ever revealed what he had learned. Faced with the choice between exposing the truth and potentially destroying the kingdom's stability, or maintaining silence and accepting exile, Prince William chose to leave Valdris rather than force a confrontation. His letter indicates that he regretted this choice, but feared that revealing Thorne's illegitimate status would lead to civil war. Elena set the letter down with trembling hands, her mind racing through the implications. Thomas wasn't just Thorne's nephew. He was the legitimate heir to the throne, the rightful king of Valdris. And Thorne, the man who had shown them such kindness, who had welcomed them as family, who had risked political damage to protect them, had no legal claim to the crown he had worn for over 20 years. "Mama!" Thomas's voice from the doorway made her start violently. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Elena quickly folded the letter, her mind scrambling for an appropriate response. How could she explain to an 8-year-old boy that he was the rightful king of the realm? How could she process this information herself when the man it concerned was hundreds of miles away, fighting battles to protect a kingdom that might not legally be his? "I'm fine, sweetheart," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Just some correspondence about your father's military service. Nothing to worry about." But even as she spoke the reassuring words, Eleanor's mind was already working through the catastrophic possibilities this revelation presented. If word of William's letter reached the wrong ears, it could destroy everything Thorne had built. Ambitious nobles like Lord Marcus would see opportunity in the chaos that would follow such a disclosure. The kingdom could be torn apart by competing claims and civil war. Thomas approached her with the unconscious grace that was becoming more pronounced as his training progressed. The ring Thorne had given him caught the light, and Elena felt a sick twist in her stomach as she realized its significance had just changed completely. That ring didn't just mark Thomas as Thorne's heir, it marked him as the rightful king, kept from his throne by ignorance and circumstance. Was Papa really a soldier? Thomas asked, settling onto the window seat beside her. Master Edwin says soldiers are very brave, but also that they sometimes have to keep secrets to protect people. The innocent question cut straight to the heart of Elena's dilemma. William had kept the ultimate secret to protect everyone. Thorne, the kingdom, their own family. But now that secret was out, at least partially, and Elena found herself in the impossible position of deciding what to do with information that could change the course of history. "Yes," she said quietly, "your father was very brave. And yes, he kept secrets when he thought it was necessary to protect the people he loved. Like Uncle Thorne does." Elena's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Master Edwin says kings have to make hard choices and sometimes can't tell everyone the reasons. He says Uncle Thorne carries lots of secrets to keep the kingdom safe." Thomas swung his legs from the window seat, his childish motion at odds with the gravity of their conversation. "Do you think Papa had secrets like that too?" The question pierced Elena's heart. If only Thomas knew how prophetic his words were, how his father had carried the most devastating secret of all, one that could have changed everything if revealed at the wrong time. "I think," Elena said carefully, "that sometimes good people keep quiet about things that might hurt others, even when staying silent is painful for them." A knock at the chamber door interrupted her thoughts. Sir Geoffrey, the young knight Thorne had assigned as her escort, stood at attention with obvious discomfort on his face. "My lady, Lord Marcus requests an audience. He says it concerns urgent matters of the realm that require your immediate attention." Elena felt ice form in her veins. The timing was too convenient, too coincidental. Somehow, word of the letter had already reached the wrong ears. Or perhaps Lord Marcus had his own sources of information about William's true identity. "Tell Lord Marcus I will receive him in the main hall in 1 hour, she said, needing time to think, to plan, to decide how much of the truth she dared reveal or deny. "He was quite insistent about the urgency, my lady." "Then he can be insistent for another hour." Elena's voice carried an authority she hadn't known she possessed until that moment. "And Sir Geoffrey, please ensure that Lord Commander Garrett is present for this meeting." After the night departed, Elena turned to Thomas with forced calm. "Sweetheart, I need you to go to your chambers and stay there until I come for you. Take whiskers and perhaps a book. You might be there for a while." Thomas's eyes widened with the instinct children had for sensing when adult problems were more serious than the grown-ups wanted to admit. "Are we in trouble?" "I don't know yet," Eleanor answered honestly, "but I need to handle some difficult conversations, and I'll do better if I know you're safe." As Thomas gathered his cat and reluctantly headed toward his room, Eleanor returned to the letter, reading it once more to ensure she hadn't misunderstood its contents. The archive keeper had been thorough in his documentation, including copies of relevant records and even a sketch of the seal William had used to authenticate his confession. The evidence was damning in its completeness. William had left nothing to chance, creating a full account of the royal lineage that would be impossible to dismiss as forgery or fantasy. He had documented dates, witnesses, even physical evidence in the form of a locket containing portraits of both King Magnus and Lady Catherine that proved their relationship predated Queen Isabel's death. But the final paragraph of the letter contained information that chilled Elena to the bone. It should be noted that copies of this correspondence have been sent to several individuals of standing within the kingdom, as per the archive keeper's standard protocols for matters of royal succession. Recipients include Lord Marquess of Aldermere, Lord Chancellor Davies, and Lady Celeste of the Royal Council. The original documents remain in our keeping, available for examination by any party with legitimate interest in their contents. Elena closed her eyes, understanding that the secret was no longer secret. By the time Thorne returned from the borderlands, half the court would know the truth about his parentage. The other half would have heard rumors, speculation, and probably exaggerated versions that bore little resemblance to reality. The political explosion was inevitable now. The only question was whether Eleanor could somehow control the damage, protect Thomas from the chaos that would follow, and find a way to warn Thorne before his enemies used this information to destroy him. A second knock came at the door, more urgent than the first. This time it was Mrs. Adelaide, her usually composed face creased with worry. "My lady, there's been considerable activity in the castle over the past hour. Lord Marquess has called an emergency session of the Royal Council, and there are riders preparing to depart, whether to recall His Majesty or to spread word to other kingdoms, I cannot say." Elena felt the walls of their secure world crumbling around them. "How much do they know?" "Enough to cause significant trouble, I fear. Kitchen gossip suggests letters have arrived from Westmarch, and Lord Marquess has been seen in deep conversation with several other nobles. Whatever storm is coming, my lady, it will break soon." Elena made her decision with the clarity that came from having no good options left. "Mrs. Adelaide, I need you to prepare travel provisions for Thomas and myself, enough for several days' journey but packed discreetly. Can you do that without drawing attention?" "Of course, my lady. Might I ask?" "The less you know, the safer." "You'll be," Elena said firmly, "but if anyone asks, you know nothing about our plans or whereabouts." As the older woman hurried away to carry out her instructions, Elena sat down at the writing desk and began composing 2 letters of her own. The first was to Thorne, a warning about what was unfolding in his absence and an explanation of the impossible situation they now faced. The second was to Lord Commander Garrett, requesting his immediate presence and discretion regarding the protection of Prince Thomas during the political upheaval that was about to engulf the kingdom. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to repeat William's choice, fleeing rather than staying to fight for what was right. But unlike her late husband, she wasn't running to protect a secret. She was running to protect the rightful king until he was old enough to claim his throne safely. Thomas appeared in the doorway again, whiskers in his arms and worry creasing his young brow. "Mama, why is everyone rushing around? And why do the guards look scared?" Elena rose and went to her son, kneeling to meet his eyes directly. "Thomas, Do you remember the stories your father used to tell you about brave princes who had to go on dangerous journeys? Yes. Well, I think we're about to begin our own journey. And like all the best adventures, it's going to require courage and trust and staying close to each other, no matter what happens. Thomas's grip tightened on his cat, but his voice was steady when he answered, "Will Uncle Thorne come find us?" Elena thought about the man who had shown them such unexpected kindness, who had welcomed them as family despite the political risks, who had no idea that the child he was learning to love was actually the legitimate heir to his throne. "Yes," she said with quiet certainty, "Uncle Thorne will come find us, but first we need to make sure we're somewhere safe when he does." The sound of armored footsteps in the corridor outside signaled that their time for quiet planning was over. Lord Marcus was coming for answers, and Elena was about to discover whether the political skills she had learned as a merchant's daughter would be enough to protect a kingdom's future. The Game of Thrones had begun, and an 8-year-old boy's wooden horse was about to become the most dangerous toy in the realm. The ancient sword lay across Thorne's knees as he sat by the dying campfire, its steel reflecting the last embers like captured starlight. His father's blade, the weapon that had carved a kingdom from chaos, that had defended the throne through 3 generations of Blackthorn rule. Now, 2 days' hard ride from the border skirmishes that had brought him north, he found himself questioning everything that blade represented. The messenger had reached him at dawn, riding a horse lathered with sweat, and bearing news that struck harder than any enemy weapon. Lord Commander Garrett's letter was brief but devastating in its implications. Elena and Thomas had vanished from Stoneheart Castle in the wake of revelations about William's true parentage. The court was in chaos. Lord Marcus was making increasingly bold moves toward claiming regency, and the kingdom teetered on the edge of civil war. But it was Elena's letter, included with Garrett's report, that had shaken Thorne to his very foundations. Her careful handwriting had laid out the truth William had died protecting, the truth about illegitimate birth, hidden marriages, and the rightful heir who sat unknowing on a throne that was never legally his. "Sire," Sir Edmund, his most trusted captain, approached the fire with cautious concern. "The men are ready to march at your command. We can reach the capital by tomorrow night if we push hard." Thorne lifted the sword, feeling its familiar weight, while grappling with the unfamiliar sensation of his world tilting beyond recognition. Thomas wasn't just his nephew, he was the rightful king of Valdris. Eleanor wasn't just his brother's widow, she was the mother of his replacement, the woman protecting the boy who should wear the crown Thorne had claimed for over 20 years. "Tell me, Edmund," he said quietly, not looking up from the blade, "what makes a man worthy to rule?" The captain shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain how to respond to such a philosophical question from a king who had always been decisively impractical. Strength, sire, wisdom, the favor of the gods." "Birth," Thorne said simply. "That's what the law says. Not merit, not ability, not the good of the realm, just the accident of which man's seed created you and whether your parents spoke vows before or after your conception." "Your Majesty—" "I am not my Majesty," Thorne interrupted, his voice carrying a strange mixture of pain and relief. "I am the bastard son of a king who covered his shame so well that even I didn't know the truth. The legitimate heir has been sleeping in my castle, playing with his toy horse, learning to trust the man who stole his birthright through ignorance." Edmund's face went pale in the firelight. "Sire, even if such claims exist, you have ruled for 23 years. You have earned the throne through your deeds, your wisdom, your protection of the realm. Have I?" Thorne rose, the sword still balanced in his hands. "How many villages like Millbrook have I failed to protect because I was too focused on maintaining a power? How many Williams have died defending their homes while I played politics in my castle? The weight of decisions made and unmade pressed down on him like the crushing depths of a deep well. Every choice to prioritize stability over justice, every compromise that favored the powerful over the powerless, every moment when he had chosen the crown's necessity over his heart's desire, all of it viewed now through the lens of illegitimate authority. "Where would you have us ride, Your Majesty?" Edmund asked, his loyalty unwavering even in the face of his king's crisis of faith. Thorne considered the question that carried the weight of kingdoms. He could ride home and fight for the throne he had unknowingly usurped, using the law's preference for established power over rightful claims. He could gather his supporters, present Thomas as a pretender, despite knowing the boy's claim was legitimate, and watch the realm tear itself apart in civil war. Or he could choose the path his brother had been too afraid to take 25 years. Go the path of truth, regardless of its consequences. First, we find Elena and Thomas, he decided. They're the key to everything now. Whether this kingdom survives the coming storm depends on protecting them until we can navigate the chaos their revelation has created. And Lord Marcus? Lord Marcus is a symptom, not the disease. He sees opportunity in confusion and weakness in divided authority. But he doesn't understand that true power comes from unity, not from exploiting fractures. Thorne slid the sword back into its sheath, the decision settling into his bones with surprising peace. We're going to give him something he doesn't expect. Clarity. The ride back to Valdris took on the urgency of a race against time and ambition. Thorne pushed his men hard, alternating between full gallop and walking pace to preserve the horses while maximizing speed. Every mile brought reports from scouts and messengers. Lord Marcus had convened an emergency council session. Several minor lords had declared their support for protecting the realm during uncertain times, and search parties were combing the countryside for Elena and Thomas. Most troubling were the reports of armed men bearing Lord Marcus's colours, moving towards strategic positions throughout the kingdom. The ambitious lord wasn't just positioning himself for political advantage. He was preparing for the possibility of armed conflict. "He means to force a confrontation," Edmund observed as they paused to rest the horses at a crossroads inn. "If he can capture Prince Thomas and claim to act as his regent, he gains legitimacy for whatever moves he makes next." "And if he can't find Thomas?" Thorne asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Then he'll claim the boy is dead and position himself as the only remaining authority capable of maintaining order. Either way, he wins unless we can present a unified alternative." Thorne nodded grimly. The political mathematics were brutally simple. In the absence of clear, legitimate authority, power flowed to whoever could claim it most convincingly. Lord Marcus understood this better than most. A young scout approached their table with urgent news. "Your Majesty, there's been a development. We've located Princess Eleanor and Prince Thomas." Thorne's heart leapt. "Where?" "The Abbey of St. Catherine, 2 days south of the capital. The abbess has given them sanctuary. But Lord Marcus's men are already moving in that direction. They'll likely reach the abbey by tomorrow afternoon." The irony of the location wasn't lost on Thorne. St. Catherine's Abbey, named for the woman who might have been his father's true wife, the woman whose legitimacy could have changed the entire course of the kingdom's history. Elena had chosen her refuge well, seeking protection in the shadow of the very secret that had shaped all their lives. "How many men does Marcus have in the field?" Thorne asked, his mind already calculating distances and tactical possibilities. "Perhaps 200, spread across multiple search parties. But the main force heading for the abbey numbers about 60 men-at-arms. And we have 40, counting the men you brought back from the border." Edmund's expression was grim. "We'll be outnumbered, and they'll reach the abbey before us, unless we take significant risks." Thorne studied the map spread across the rough wooden table, tracing possible routes and weighing impossible choices. He could arrive at the abbey after Lord Marcus's forces and face a siege situation that would endanger everyone he was trying to protect. Or he could attempt to intercept the enemy force before they reached sanctuary, risking everything on a single battle with uncertain odds. "There's another option," he said slowly, his finger finding a particular location on the map. "The old shepherd's road through Blackwood Pass. It's dangerous terrain, especially at night, but it would put us at the Abbey 12 hours ahead of Marcus's main force." Edmund studied the route with professional skepticism. That pass claimed 3 horses last spring just from merchant caravans moving slowly in daylight. Attempting it at night with armed men is exactly the kind of desperate maneuver Lord Marcus won't expect us to try. Thorne's voice carried the same decisive authority that had seen him through 23 years of difficult choices. Sometimes the difference between victory and defeat is the willingness to attempt what your enemy considers impossible. As they prepared to depart, Thorne found himself thinking about the sword at his side and what it represented. His father's blade, earned through conquest and maintained through strength, but strength built on a foundation of lies and hidden truths. Perhaps it was time for that blade to serve a different kind of justice, to protect the rightful heir rather than defend a usurped throne. The irony was sharp as winter steel. He had spent his entire reign learning to be the king he thought the realm needed, only to discover that the kingdom's true need might be served by stepping aside for the boy he had come to love as a son. But first, that boy and his mother needed to survive the chaos that truth had unleashed. And if protecting them meant risking everything Thorne had built over 2 decades of rule, then that was a price he was finally ready to pay. The ancient sword sang softly in the wind as they rode toward whatever destiny waited at the end of the shepherd's road, a destiny that would determine not just who wore the crown, but what that crown would represent for generations to come. The royal seal of Valdris had never felt heavier in Thorne's hands than it did in the grey light of dawn. As he stood before the ancient gates of St. Catherine's Abbey, the golden disc bore the wolf's head crest that had represented his family's authority for 3 generations. But now he understood that authority had been built on foundations, far more fragile than he had ever imagined. Behind him, his 40 men waited in formation, their armor dulled with mud from the treacherous night ride through Blackwood Pass. They had lost 2 horses to the rocky terrain and arrived at the Abbey with barely an hour to spare before Lord Marcus's forces would crest the southern hills. But they were here, positioned between the sanctuary where Elena and Thomas sheltered and the threat that pursued them. "Your Majesty," Abbess Margaret emerged from the Abbey's main building, her weathered face calm despite the armed men suddenly surrounding her peaceful sanctuary. "Princess Elena said you would come. Where are they?" Thorne asked, his eyes scanning the Abbey grounds for any sign of his nephew and the woman who had become so much more than just family to him. "Safe within the chapel, as is proper for those claiming sanctuary. But, Your Majesty, I must tell you, the boy knows." Princess Elena felt it necessary to explain why they fled the castle so suddenly. Thorne's heart clenched. Thomas knew the truth about his parentage, about his rightful claim to the throne, about the impossible situation that had driven them from their home. An 8-year-old child was now carrying the weight of knowledge that could reshape a kingdom. How? Did he take it? With remarkable composure, though I suspect he doesn't fully understand the implications yet. He asked if it meant he had done something wrong, and whether you would still want to be his uncle. The abbess's expression softened with maternal concern. Princess Elena assured him that love doesn't change based on titles or bloodlines. But the poor child is clearly confused. Before Thorne could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed across the valley. Lord Marcus's force appeared on the ridge, their banners bright against the morning sky, 60 armed men riding with the confidence of those who believed they held the stronger position. "Sir Edmund," Thorne called to his captain, his voice carrying across the Abbey courtyard with calm authority. "Position our men defensively, but keep weapons sheathed unless directly threatened. I want to resolve this through words before we resort to steel." As his forces took their positions, Thorne walked toward the Abbey gates, the royal seal still clutched in his hand. Every step felt weighted with the magnitude of what was about to unfold, not just a confrontation between rival claimants, but a moment that would define what kind of kingdom Valdris would become. Lord Marcus rode at the head of his column, his polished armor and proud bearing projecting the image of a man convinced of his own righteousness. As he drew closer, Thorne could see the calculation in his eyes, the assessment of forces, the weighing of options, the confidence of someone who believed he held superior cards in a deadly game. "Your Majesty," Marcus called out as he reined in his horse just outside the abbey's grounds. "How fortuitous to find you here. We've been searching for Princess Elena and the boy. There are urgent matters of state that require their attention." "I'm sure there are," Thorne replied, stepping forward so that he stood directly between Marcus's force and the abbey entrance. "Though I suspect your definition of urgent matters and mine might differ significantly." Marcus dismounted, his movements deliberately casual despite the tension crackling in the air between their two forces. "The recent revelations about Prince William's true identity have created complications that require careful management. The boy's safety, the succession question, the stability of the realm, all of these concerns demand immediate attention. And you've appointed yourself to provide that attention? Someone must act decisively when the realm faces uncertainty. The Royal Council has expressed concerns about the current situation, and I have offered my services in resolving these difficulties." Marcus's tone was smooth, reasonable, the voice of a man presenting himself as the only rational choice in an irrational situation. "Which difficulties would those be exactly?" Thorne asked, though he was watching Marcus's men more than Marcus himself. They remained mounted, hands near weapons, but not yet drawn, professional soldiers following orders, not zealots ready to die for a cause. The legitimacy question, primarily. If Prince William's claims about royal lineage are accurate, then young Thomas has a superior claim to the throne. But he's a child, incapable of ruling, requiring a regent to govern in his name until he comes of age. Marcus spread his hands. "In a gesture of reasoned explanation, I merely offer to serve in that capacity to ensure the realm's stability during a difficult transition." The words were carefully chosen, technically legal, and completely divorced from the naked ambition that motivated them. Marcus was positioning himself as the kingdom's savior rather than its potential usurper, wrapping his power grab in the language of duty and necessity. "And my role in this arrangement?" Thorne inquired, his voice carrying a dangerous quiet that his men recognized as a warning of approaching storms. "That would depend on your willingness to accept the new realities. If Prince William's documentation proves accurate, then your own claim to the throne becomes questionable. But there would certainly be a place for a man of your experience and wisdom in advising the Regency Council." The insult was delivered with silk-wrapped courtesy, but it was an insult nonetheless, the suggestion that Thorne might gracefully step aside from the throne he had held for over 20 years, accepting a subordinate role in his own kingdom. "You see," Thorne lifted the royal seal, letting it catch the morning light, "and if I choose not to accept these new realities, then we have a problem that will require resolution." Marcus's hand moved closer to his sword hilt, a gesture that was noted by every armed man present. "I hope it won't come to that. Civil war serves no one's interests." "No," Thorne agreed, "it doesn't. Which is why I propose a different solution entirely." He raised his voice so that it carried clearly to both forces, his words ringing across the abbey courtyard with the authority of decades of command. "I hereby formally acknowledge Prince Thomas Blackthorne as the legitimate heir to the throne of Valdris, with all rights and privileges pertaining to that position." The declaration hit Lord Marcus like a physical blow. Whatever scenarios he had prepared for, he clearly hadn't expected Thorne to voluntarily surrender his claim to the throne. His carefully constructed justifications for regency suddenly lost their foundation. "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, "while your generosity is admirable, the boy is still a child. He cannot rule without proper guidance and protection." "Agreed," Thorne interrupted, taking another step forward. "Which is why I also formally declare my intention to serve as Prince Thomas's regent and protector until he reaches his majority, at which time the throne will pass to him fully and completely." This second declaration was even more devastating. To Marcus's position, a regency under Thorne's authority would maintain the existing power structure while acknowledging Thomas's superior claim, exactly the opposite of what Marcus had hoped to achieve. "The council," Marcus began desperately, "the council serves at the pleasure of the crown," Thorne said firmly, "and the crown has made its decision. Prince Thomas is the rightful king, and I am his appointed regent. Any challenge to that arrangement is treason against the legitimate authority of the realm." The word treason hung in the air like an executioner's axe, transforming the political maneuvering into something far more dangerous. Marcus's hand dropped to his sword, and Thorne saw the moment when calculated ambition gave way to desperate necessity. "Draw your weapons!" Marcus shouted to his men, his voice cracking with strain. "Arrest the usurper!" But even as steel rang against leather as swords cleared their sheaths, Thorne was already moving. The royal seal flew from his hand with deadly accuracy, striking Marcus in the chest and sending him staggering backward. In the same motion, Thorne drew his father's ancient blade, the morning sun reflecting off its polished steel like captured fire. The first phase of the confrontation was over. Now came the part where all their careful words would be decided by the more ancient language of sword and shield, where the future of a kingdom would be written in blood on the consecrated ground of an abbey dedicated to truth. The crown of thorns was nothing more than twisted garden vines that Thomas had woven together while waiting in the abbey chapel, his small fingers working the flexible stems into a circle as he tried to make sense of the terrible knowledge his mother had shared with him. But as the sound of clashing steel echoed through the sacred walls, that simple creation took on the weight of prophecy. "Mama," he whispered, pressing closer to Elena as the battle raged outside. "Why are they fighting about me?" Elena's arms tightened around her son, her heart breaking for the innocence that was being torn away by forces beyond their control. Through the stained glass windows, she could see the chaos of combat, Thorne's smaller force fighting desperately against Lord Marcus's superior numbers, steel ringing against steel in a deadly dance that would determine not just who ruled Valdris, but what kind of kingdom it would become. "Because sometimes grown-ups disagree about what's right," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that clawed at her chest. "And sometimes those disagreements can only be settled by showing who has the strength to protect what they believe in." "But Uncle Thorne is strong," Thomas said with the absolute faith children placed in the adults they loved. "He won't let the bad men hurt us, will he?" Elena watched through the window as Thorne fought with the skill and fury of a man defending more than just political position. He was protecting family, protecting the future, protecting the chance for something better than the cycles of ambition and betrayal that had shaped too many royal successions. His ancient sword moved like liquid silver in the morning light, but even his formidable skill couldn't overcome the simple mathematics of being outnumbered. "Your uncle is very strong," she agreed, then made a decision that would have terrified her just weeks ago. "But he shouldn't have to fight alone." She rose from the chapel bench, her mind racing through possibilities and desperate plans. Abbess Margaret had given them sanctuary, but sanctuary only mattered if there were laws and customs left to respect it. If Lord Marcus emerged victorious from this battle, those protections would become meaningless. "Thomas," she said, kneeling, to meet her son's eyes directly, "I need you to do something very brave for me. Can you do that?" He nodded solemnly, the crown of thorns still clutched in his small hands. "I need you to stay here in the chapel with Abbess Margaret, no matter what happens outside. Even if you hear frightening sounds, even if people tell you, To come out, you stay right here until either Uncle Thorne or I come to get you personally. Do you understand? Where are you going? Elena looked toward the chapel's side entrance, where a narrow path led to the abbey's bell tower, the highest point for miles around, a place where a signal could be seen across the entire valley. I'm going to help Uncle Thorne, the only way. I can, she kissed Thomas's forehead, her heart nearly breaking at the trust in his young eyes, then turned toward the door that would take her into the chaos beyond. But her son's voice stopped her. Mama, if I'm really supposed to be king someday, what kind of king should I be? The question pierced through all the political calculations and tactical concerns to the heart of what this battle was really about. Elena turned back to look at her child, no longer just her son, but the rightful heir to a kingdom, a boy who would someday have to decide what his crown would represent. The kind who protects people who can't protect themselves, she said without hesitation. The kind who chooses what's right over what's easy. The kind who remembers that being strong means using your strength to help others, not to hurt them. Thomas nodded gravely, as if filing away these words for future reference. Then he held up the crown of thorns he had made. Thomas nodded gravely, as if filing away these words for future reference. Then he held up the crown of thorns he had made. This is for Uncle Thorne when he comes back. So he knows that kings don't always get to wear pretty crowns. Sometimes they have to carry painful ones too. The wisdom in those words stole Elena's breath. Her 8-year-old son understood something about leadership that many adults never grasped. That true authority came with suffering. That protecting others often meant accepting hurt yourself. Elena ran through the abbey corridors, her skirts hampering her progress as she climbed the narrow stone steps that led to the bell tower. Outside, the battle had spread across the entire courtyard, with Thorne's men forming a defensive circle around the chapel entrance, while Lord Marcus's forces pressed their numerical advantage with ruthless efficiency. She reached the bell chamber, gasping for breath, her hands shaking as she grasped the rope that would set the massive bronze bell in motion. The deep, resonant tone echoed across the valley like the voice of judgment itself, a sound that could be heard for miles in every direction. 3 long peals, then a pause. 3 more peals, then another pause. The ancient signal for sanctuary violated, a call that would bring every able-bodied man in the surrounding countryside, sworn by oath and custom, to defend the abbey's sacred neutrality. Below in the courtyard, she could see the effect of her signal as heads turned toward the bell tower, and Lord Marcus's men began to show the first signs of uncertainty. They had come expecting a quick political arrest, not a prolonged battle that would attract witnesses and potential reinforcements. "Stop that bell!" Marcus's voice carried clearly in the morning air, his composure finally cracking under the pressure of a plan gone badly wrong. But it was too late. Elena could already see riders appearing on the distant ridges, farmers and shepherds and village militia responding to the call, their numbers still small but growing steadily. Lord Marcus faced a choice between completing his mission quickly or risking a prolonged confrontation that would expose his actions to scrutiny he couldn't control. In the courtyard, Thorne fought with the desperation of a man who knew this battle would determine everything he held dear. His ancient sword carved through Marcus's formations like divine retribution, but Elena could see the toll the fighting was taking. He was bleeding from multiple wounds, his movements showing the fatigue that came from facing too many opponents. For too long, Sir Edmund fell beside his king, overwhelmed by 3 attackers at once. One by one, Thorne's loyal men were being cut down by the sheer weight of numbers, their sacrifice buying time and space, but unable to change the ultimate mathematics of the engagement. "Yield!" Lord Marcus called out, his own sword red with blood, as he pressed closer to where Thorne made his stand. "You're outnumbered and outmatched. Surrender now, and I'll allow you to live." Thorne's response was to launch himself at Marcus with renewed fury. his blade singing through the air in strokes that spoke of decades of training and the righteous anger of a man defending his family. For a moment, it seemed he might break, through Marcus's guard entirely. Then the trap closed. Two of Marcus's men struck from behind, while their lord held Thorne's attention from the front. The king of Valdris staggered, his sword dropping from suddenly nerveless fingers as steel found. The gaps in his armor. He fell to one knee, then both, his strength finally failing him. "No!" Elena's scream echoed from the bell tower, her voice raw with anguish as she watched the man she had come to love brought low by treachery and superior numbers. Lord Marcus stood over his fallen rival, breathing heavily but triumphant. "It's over," he called to the remaining defenders. "Your king has fallen. Lay down your weapons and you'll be treated mercifully." But even as victory seemed within Marcus's grasp, a new sound echoed across the battlefield, the laughter of a child. Thomas had emerged from the chapel despite his mother's instructions, the crown of thorns still clutched in his small hands as he walked calmly through the carnage toward where Thorne knelt, bleeding. "Thomas, no!" Elena started down from the bell. In tower, her heart in her throat as she watched her son place himself in mortal danger. "Uncle Thorne," Thomas said as he reached the fallen king, his young voice clear and unafraid. "I made this for you." He placed the crown of thorns gently on Thorne's head, replacing the iron circlet that had been knocked away in the fighting. "Mama says real kings choose what's right, even when it hurts." The simple gesture transformed everything. Thorne straightened despite his wounds, drawing strength from the innocent faith of the child he had sworn to protect. The crown of thorns sat strangely on his brow, but it carried a weight and dignity that no golden circlet had ever possessed. "You're right, Thomas," he said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "Real kings do choose what's right, even when it hurts." He struggled to his feet, one hand on his nephew's shoulder for support, the other reaching for his fallen sword. Lord Marcus raised his own blade, but hesitated. Striking down a wounded man was one thing, but cutting down a king while a child stood beside him was another matter entirely. That moment of hesitation was enough. The riders responding to the abbey bell had reached the courtyard, their numbers swelling as more and more of the common folk arrived to defend the sanctuary. Lord Marcus's men found themselves surrounded, their advantage in numbers suddenly reversed. "It seems," Thorne said quietly, blood trickling down his face beneath the crown of thorns, "that the kingdom has chosen its protector, and it isn't you, Marcus." The ambitious lord looked around at the growing crowd of determined faces, farmers with pitchforks, shepherds with staffs, village guards with simple weapons but unshakable resolve. His coup had failed not because of superior force, but because the people themselves had risen to defend what they believed was right. "This isn't over," Marcus snarled, but he was already backing toward his horse. "The boy's claim changes nothing. He's still a child who needs guidance." "He'll get it," Thorne replied, pulling Thomas closer, "from someone who loves him more than power, who values his happiness more than political advantage. Go, Marcus, leave Valdris and don't return. Consider it mercy for old friendship's sake." As Marcus and his remaining men retreated, the crown of thorns caught the sunlight, transforming the simple garden creation into something that looked almost regal. Thomas looked up at his uncle with shining eyes. "Does this mean you're still going to be king?" the boy asked. "For now," Thorne replied, his hand gentle on Thomas's shoulder, "until you're old enough to decide for yourself what kind of king you want to be. And when that time comes, you'll choose better than I ever did." Elena reached them then, gathering both the man and the boy into her embrace as the bells of St. Catherine's Abbey rang out across the valley, proclaiming that love had triumphed over ambition, that family had proven stronger than politics, and that sometimes the most powerful crown was one woven from thorns and sacrifice and the innocent faith of a child who believed in doing what was right. The new banner of Valdris flew for the first time on a crisp autumn morning 6 months after the Battle of St. Catherine's Abbey, its design catching the breeze with symbolic power that spoke to everyone who saw it. The traditional wolf's head remained, but now it was surrounded by a circle of thorns that transformed the ancient symbol of predatory strength into something deeper: protection through sacrifice, power tempered by wisdom, leadership earned through pain, willingly accepted. Thorne stood on the castle's highest balcony, watching his kingdom wake to another day of peace and prosperity that had been purchased with blood and revelation and the courage to choose truth over comfortable lies. The scars from that desperate battle had healed on his body, but the lessons learned there would mark his reign for whatever years remained to him. Uncle Thorne? Thomas appeared at his side, no longer the frightened child who had fled the castle in the dark of night, but a boy growing into awareness of his own destiny. At 9 years old, he carried himself with the unconscious dignity that came from understanding both privilege and responsibility. "Master Edwin says you wanted to see me before the morning council session." "I did." Thorne knelt to bring himself to Thomas's eye level, a habit that had developed over the months as he learned to balance the roles of king and uncle, regent and family. "Today marks 6 months since we changed the succession laws. It's time we discussed what that means for your future." The new laws had been one of Thorne's first acts after their return to Stoneheart Castle. Rather than simply acknowledging Thomas as his heir, he had worked with the Royal Council to establish a formal structure that would govern the boy's education and eventual transition to power. It was unprecedented in its scope and revolutionary in its implications. The first time in Valdris's history that a king had voluntarily limited his own authority in favor of preparing his successor. "Will I have to start wearing the crown soon?" Thomas asked, his hand unconsciously touching the simple silver circlet that marked his status as heir apparent. It was a far cry from the heavy iron crown of kings, designed to remind him that leadership was a burden to be carried, not a prize to be won. "Not for many years yet," Thorne assured him. "The law requires you to reach your 20th birthday before you can claim the throne fully. Until then, you'll continue learning what it means to serve our people, to make difficult decisions, and to carry the weight of responsibility that comes with power. And you'll help me every step of the way." The promise was one Thorne had made many times over the past months, but it carried fresh weight each time he spoke it. "Though I suspect you'll surpass me long before you claim your crown." It was true. Thomas had shown remarkable aptitude for the complexities of governance, approaching problems with a combination of his father's compassion and his uncle's strategic thinking. More importantly, he seemed to understand instinctively that kingship was about service rather than dominance, protection rather than control. "Thomas," Elena's voice carried across the balcony as she joined them, her presence still causing the small skip in Thorne's heartbeat that had become both familiar and precious. "Over the months since their return, Master Edwin is waiting for your history lesson, and Cook has prepared those honey cakes you're so fond of." "In a moment, Mamma." Thomas turned back to Thorne with the serious expression that appeared whenever he grappled with concepts beyond his years. "Uncle Thorne, when I'm king, will you stay and help me, even when I don't need a regent anymore?" The question touched something deep in Thorne's chest. "Where else would I go? This is my home and you're my family. I'll be here as long as you want me, in whatever capacity serves you best." "Good." Thomas's smile was radiant with relief. "Because I think being king would be very lonely without someone to talk to who understands about crowns and difficult choices and taking care of people." As Thomas scampered off to his lessons, Elena moved to stand beside Thorne at the balcony's edge. The comfortable silence between them had become one of his greatest treasures, the peace of being with someone who understood both his burdens and his joys, who had seen him at his weakest and chosen to stay. "He's growing up so fast," she observed, watching their son disappear into the castle's depths. "Sometimes I look at him and see glimpses of the man he'll become, and it takes my breath away." "He'll be a better king than I ever was," Thorne said with quiet certainty. He has your compassion, and William's idealism, combined with the practical education we're giving him about power and its responsibilities. The realm will be fortunate to have him." Eleanor turned to study his profile, noting the lines that had deepened around his eyes over the past months, not from stress or worry, but from laughter and contentment that had been absent from his life for too many years. "And what about you? Have you given any thought to what you'll do when your regency ends?" "Live," Thorne said simply. "For the first time in decades, I'll have the luxury of living without the weight of ultimate responsibility on my shoulders. I can be an advisor, a teacher, a protector, but the final decisions will be Thomas's to make. Is that enough for you, after so many years of absolute authority?" Thorne considered the question seriously, watching the activity in the courtyard. Below, where servants and guards went about their duties with the relaxed efficiency that came from serving a stable, prosperous kingdom. 6 months ago, that stability had been threatened by ambition and hidden truths. Now it rested on a foundation stronger than political calculation. It was built on love and honest acknowledgement of both strengths and limitations. "More than enough," he said finally. "I spent 23 years learning to be the king I thought the realm needed. Now I get to spend the rest of my life learning to be the man my family needs. It's a better bargain than I ever dared hope for." Elena's hand found his, their fingers intertwining with the naturalness that had developed over months of shared challenges and growing trust. "William would be proud of you," she said quietly. "Proud of how you've cared for Thomas. Proud of the changes you've made to the kingdom. Proud of the man you've chosen to become. And proud of the woman who raised his son with such wisdom and strength," Thorne replied, lifting their joined hands to brush a gentle kiss across her knuckles. "I never thanked you properly for saving us all at the Abbey. If you hadn't rung that bell, then someone else would have found another way," Elena interrupted gently. "Good people don't let evil triumph when they have the power to intervene. That's one of the lessons Thomas learns every day from watching you." A commotion in the courtyard below drew their attention, a messenger arriving with the speed and urgency that usually meant important news from distant provinces. But instead of the tension such arrivals had once brought, Thorne felt only mild curiosity. The kingdom's foundations were solid now, its future secured by more than just military might or political maneuvering. "Duty calls," Elena observed with fond amusement. "It always does," Thorne agreed, but without the weariness that had once accompanied such acknowledgments. Though these days, duty feels less like a burden and more like a privilege. As they made their way back into the castle, Thorne caught sight of the new banner flying proudly above the main gate. The circle of thorns surrounding the wolf's head seemed to catch the light differently in the afternoon sun, creating an effect that was both beautiful and sobering, a reminder that the greatest victories often came through accepting pain rather than inflicting it. Through choosing sacrifice over selfishness, Thomas would wear a crown of thorns someday, metaphorically, if not literally. But unlike his uncle, he would do so knowing that the pain was worth bearing, that the burden was worth carrying, and that the love of family and the service of his people would make even the heaviest crown feel light upon his brow. The messengers' news, when it came, was good. Reports of prosperity from the outer provinces, successful harvests, and the kind of peace that allowed merchants to travel safely and children to play without fear. It was the kingdom William had dreamed of when he chose exile over compromise, the realm Thomas would inherit when his time came to rule. But for now it was enough that the new banner flew freely in the wind, carrying its message of strength. Tempered by mercy, power guided by love, and the understanding that true kingship was not about wearing a crown, but about bearing the weight of caring for others with grace and wisdom, and the courage to choose what was right over what was easy. The crown of thorns had become a crown of hope, and the kingdom of Valdris had learned that sometimes the greatest strength came from admitting weakness, the highest honor from accepting help, and the deepest love from being willing to step aside so that others might flourish. In the distance, the abbey bells rang the hour, their bronze voices carrying across the valley the same message they had proclaimed on that desperate morning 6 months ago. That sanctuary mattered, that truth prevailed, and that love, in the end, conquered. All